do it. We'll give it a
Oh,
minute
yeah,
or two.
Separately.
Bless you, no worries.
All right, so
That's fine, yeah.
Sent 4 invites, so just be 4 of us on one.
Brilliant. Well, no, thanks for joining.
That's all right, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, we'll give it another minute or two and then I'll get started. It's all being recorded, as you may or may not have seen on your screen there. So if you've got colleagues or you know people that were hoping to get here, haven't been able to, then they'll be able to watch it back at their convenience afterwards. All right, everyone, I think in the interest of time, I'll get started because it's just about to push over to 10 or to 3 minutes past 10. So good morning and welcome to the Wellbeing at Work webinar this July. For those that haven't been along to one of our webinars before, welcome. We hope you enjoy the next hour and a half. Those that have been to one before, you'll kind of know most of obviously the drill with regards to how these work, but I'll take you through some sort of housekeeping bits anyway. Essentially, we've got an hour and a half. I'm going to give a quick update in the next 5 or 10 minutes regarding our own team, and then I'll be passing across to Vicky Brooks, who's come along to talk to us about trauma-informed practice. And then at the end of that presentation, we're going to have a bit of an opportunity to ask any questions and to generally have a bit of a networking and sharing best practice around how things are feeling out there across your organisations in relation to wellbeing at work. Housekeeping bits. If you're happy to keep your mics on mute, that just generally helps things run smoothly through the process. Questions wise, you can use the chat bar. So if you've got questions that sort of pop into your head as we move through the morning, what we're going to try and do is we're then going to deal with those questions at the end of the session. So if you're thinking, oh, I might forget it by then, just pop it in the chat bar. And then either Jenny or one of my other colleagues will kind of help just remind us to go back to those and answer those questions at the end. Like I said before, it is being recorded. So if you'd prefer not to be recorded, then obviously you can keep your camera off, but it is lovely seeing everyone. At the moment, I've only got a small kind of like line of people that I can see. But once I stop screen sharing, hopefully I'll be able to see everyone there. And it's always lovely to see everyone's faces. If there are any kind of technological issues, for example, if I get kicked out, then obviously I'll do my best to come back in as quickly as possible. But Jenny's there kind of on hand to kind of fill in if anything does go wrong. Certainly individually, if you're having any technological issues with connections and things like that, again, sometimes turning cameras off can help improve connection. And then at least you can hear and see what's going on. But with regards to housekeeping, like I say, I think that's pretty much it. Time-wise, I will do my best to stick with time. And like I said, we've got that opportunity at the end of the session to ask any questions and just have a bit of a kind of a sharing best practice before we finish up. But yeah, welcome everyone. Hopefully your glasses are charged. It's a warm day out there, so stay hydrated. And obviously, if you need to go off to grab a drink or at any point, then obviously feel free to do so. Quick update from me, and then I'm going to pass across and introduce you all to Vicky. So my name is Greg Price. I'm a health improvement manager at Live Well Southwest, and I kind of look after the wellbeing at work kind of part of our wellbeing team within the organisation. And for those again that have not come to a webinar before and haven't got a clear picture of what we do, we essentially deliver 3 kind of key projects: the Wellbeing at Work Awards, the Wellbeing Champions, and then wellbeing training offers. Talking about a few of those things today. And at the end of the slide set, there's our contact details. So if you need to get in contact with either myself or the team to get more information, then you'll have that information. Everything that we've covered today will get sent out to all attendees after the session, and there'll be an evaluation form there as well for you to complete. A few things that I wanted to cover today was a bit of a team update. First of all, we've had a few changes and adjustments within the Wellbeing at Work team within our, with ourselves. We've welcomed a new team member, Shawnee. Shawnee's on the call today. And she's going to be supporting both the Wellbeing at Work Awards and the Wellbeing Champions from an admin point of view. So a massive welcome to Shawnee. It's only week 2, so bless her. She's still getting a lot of information thrown at her, but she's doing fab, and really kind of looking forward to her kind of meeting you all, whether it be on a webinar or now that we're getting out and about and seeing people. You might well come across Shawnee over the coming months. And kind of related to that, because a lot of what Shawnee's going to be doing was stuff that Charlie had been doing. And again, those that have been working with us for a little while have probably worked with Charlie. And Charlie's kind of taken a step up, and she's going to be taking more of an active role in the development of our Wellbeing Champions offer, and also getting involved in some training delivery. And I've got a few slides about some of that training in a bit. So yeah, welcome to Shawnee, and well done to Charlie for making that step up. Over the last few weeks, like I said before, it's been fab to be getting out and about and visiting some of your businesses and some of the individuals working within the businesses. Those that attended our annual awards back in April, where we recognised some of the sort of excellent work that's been going on across the city over the last 12 months. And what we've tried to do between now and then is get out and present some of those awards to those people and see them in person and have a bit of a catch up. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to some of those people today. First of all, Gemma Freeman, who's the kind of health and wellbeing lead over at Plymouth City Council. She was awarded the kind of Wellbeing Champion Mentor Award for going just above and beyond, and not only just helping individuals within Plymouth City Council, but also being proactive around supporting other wellbeing champions in other organisations across the city. So amazing work from Gemma, and it was lovely to kind of see her in person last week and present her with her little trophy, which I've no doubt's got pride of place. And also a few weeks ago, I met Ashlyn and Isabel from the Early Careers Health and Wellbeing team over at Babcock, and they won our Wellbeing Champions Team of the Year. Loads of excellent work they've been doing over the last 12 months. So a big well done to them. We also went and met Karen last week over at Pushed. So Pushed are one of our kind of small organizations, small businesses that went through our Wellbeing at Work Awards. And Karen's been doing some excellent work. And we just wanted to recognize that it doesn't matter how big or small the organization is, it's what you're doing and it's the way you're kind of supporting your staff. So a big well done to Karen for our kind of micro business Wellbeing Champion of the Year. And then the final one was just the, Wellbeing Champion of the Year, and that went to Kath over at Co-op. Again, so myself and Shawnee popped across to see Kath last week, had a bit of a catch up, and again presented her award. So well done to all those people. It was lovely to see you all, and hopefully, again, I know that I don't want to mention the COVID word, but I know it's been mentioned more over the last few weeks, but hopefully we'll still be able to continue to get out and see people in person, because it is nice. Jumping on, because I know I'm rattling on as usual, just a bit of information on our wellbeing training offer. We've got a couple of training sessions coming up. We're really getting back into our face-to-face training delivery now. MHFA Youth, a couple of dates in October, tickets still available. So again, when you get the presentation, you can just click on that link and it will take you straight through to where you can book places if you need them. Same with Assist. We've got a couple of dates in August, and then there's also some additional dates later in the year. So Assist is sort of suicide prevention and awareness training. Really, really good training. So if anyone, either yourself or you're thinking this is something the organization would benefit from, you can click on those links to book on, or if you need additional information, you can just get in touch with the team. Because in addition to those training, we've got other things going on. The community suicide awareness and the emotional resilience training offers are quite new to the team. And this is something that Charlie's going to be supporting the delivery of, along with another trainer. This can be delivered both virtually and face-to-face. We've got monthly sessions that are being delivered virtually at the moment. But if your organization felt that they needed maybe a bespoke offer, then we can look at delivering face-to-face kind of within the business as well. Suicide awareness is around kind of low-level suicide knowledge and being able to start those conversations and support people. The emotional resilience is more about individuals being able to look after themselves. So if, for example, you've got people that are wellbeing champions within your organization and would benefit from also looking after themselves, the emotional resilience workshop is exactly, for that. General link to our wellbeing page. Other things like Safe Talk, Connect, 5 and bystander training are all there. So a quick run through of our wellbeing training offer. We're there to support you if you need any support. And then the one future event, obviously our next webinar, which is on Wednesday, the 5th of October, we're going to be delivering some sort of menopause awareness training. So you can click on the link, get yourself booked on. And then we'd look forward to seeing everyone again there. Not necessarily got any slides that I'm covering today, but the other thing that I just wanted to mention, obviously regarding our Wellbeing at Work Awards. So again, for those organizations that are either new to us or that have been in contact with us for some time, but are yet to kind of maybe look at the awards, get in contact. The awards are there to provide that structure and that support to help your organization to kind of prioritize wellbeing at work. So you can reach out to myself or Jenny, and we can give you a bit more information on that. Again, it really is an excellent sort of process for an organization to kind of layer that wellbeing work onto. So thank you for your time with regards to my quick update. What I'm going to quickly do is stop sharing and then also introduce you go on, Jenny. Say
sorry,
while I'm
Greg,
just doing this.
Nita had raised her hand, so I don't
go
know
on.
if Nita wanted to come in.
Hi, sorry, I took it down again once I sort of realised time was going on. But just to say, we also have a Safe Talk on the 10th of August, which is a sort of about three and a half hour suicide prevention and awareness course for anyone who doesn't want to do sort of a full 2 days of assist. We do actually have that one available, which is taking place at the lovely venue of Beacon Hub, which is over in the north side of the city. So if anyone wants to join us on that, that would be great. So that would be the morning of August the 10th, which is a Wednesday. Okay, so Safe Talk training for anyone who's interested. Thank you.
Thanks, Nita. That's brilliant. Nita's one of our trainers in the team. So yeah, always lovely to have her here and sharing that information. Right, so I've spoken enough. So I'm just going to quickly introduce Vicky Brooks from the Trauma Informed Network. She came along to one of our team meetings 6-7 months ago now and presented a 3-hour trauma informed kind of practice training session. And it really just blew me away. And for me, it can have such an impact within organizations and within businesses across this city. 2 things to think about is one, the reach that we've got within our organizations. There are businesses across the city and those businesses employ hundreds of thousands of people. So if we can help organizations to be more trauma informed, it's going to reach more and more individuals. It's going to reach the communities they live in. It's going to reach their families. And the second thing to think about as we move into the trauma-informed practice session is that if we can get our managers to be more trauma-informed, if we can help them to be more understanding in that regard, then it's going to help with things like retention, staff well-being, potentially even recruitment as well. So yeah, we've only got an hour today, and it is a kind of a condensed hour. Vicky would normally do this. So again, we did a 3-hour one, but there's also a full day's training. So bear that in mind. And if you need additional information afterwards, then I know Vicky's there to kind of help. But I'll pass across to Vicky, and we'll have that opportunity to ask some questions afterwards. So welcome, Vicky.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much, sincerely, for the opportunity to come and talk to so many people. And also to get a snapshot of the work that's going on with the wellbeing work, the awards. Just hearing that, just really celebrating wellbeing in the community and across the businesses. So to get a bit of a snapshot of the courses and the training that's on offer. So that's actually been really, really useful and interesting for me as well. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come along. I'm Vicky Brooks from the Trauma Informed Plymouth Network. I have come across some of the faces and names are familiar, which is really nice for me. My background is in drug and alcohol work. I've worked with Harbour, the drug and alcohol agency here in Plymouth for the last 17 years. Now originally in the criminal justice team, working with people who are going in and out of custody, but for the last 10 years working with families with parents essentially whose drug and alcohol use is impacting on their children. So lots of hidden harm and safeguarding and care proceedings work. That's my kind of background, but since last July, I've been in post supporting the development of the Trauma Informed Plymouth network for the last year. The network is just an amazing coming together of people who are interested in learning about and promoting trauma-informed ways of working. It's as simple as that. It started off as a conversation between people who kept bumping into each other in meetings and talking about how trauma is often the underlying factor in so many of the difficulties that we see. And that conversation has just grown and grown and grown over the last 4 years exponentially, and we have well over 400 members. It rises daily. I can't keep up with it, from people right across all the statutory services, the community and voluntary sector, and with lived experience of trauma at its heart. So it's really great to be able to reach out to businesses and more into the community with this opportunity with you guys today. So that's a little bit about the network. As Greg has said, this was originally written as we deliver this as a full day face-to-face training. This is very much a snapshot. It can be delivered as a longer sort of 3-hour online version, but today is just a snapshot. We've condensed it, and this is very much a pilot, so we really are asking you today, really welcome your feedback and your thoughts on how this lands, on the content, on its application and its relevance to your organisations and businesses. But yeah, we'll move through the slides and I will probably come back to that a little bit. Is that moving through, Greg? I can see you on the screen. Yeah, brilliant. So we always want to be, whenever we're delivering this content, to be really trauma sensitive right from the start. We're not going to be talking about traumatic experiences in detail today, and certainly I'm not going to be coming to you and asking you to share any personal experiences, but trauma is really common. That's very much a message that I'll be getting across today. So inevitably some of the content may still be triggering and challenging. It may make you reflect on some of your own experiences, certainly to think about some of the people that you come into contact with in your roles, or loved ones, family, friends. So we want you to feel safe, and we will consider sources of self-care and support. And obviously you're in wellbeing teams, and that's what this is all about. And Greg would be contactable afterwards as well, but just being sensitive about that from the start. But we're here because, you know, our argument in the Trauma Informed Plymouth network is that trauma is everybody's business. Without necessarily realizing it, you will be seeing its impact as part of your every working day. It's likely that within this virtual room, people will have experienced a number of adversities themselves, or certainly know people who have. Trauma is common, and being trauma informed allows us to look after ourselves and to work sensitively with the people who work in our organisations. See, is that working through? So Greg's kind of touched on this. It's kind of, I'm hoping not. I'm being told that this is an audience of people who, you know, are already really committed to this. But some organisations, some businesses might be thinking, why trauma informed? Why is this relevant to us? Why do we need to be considering this? So want to kind of provide a little bit of context setting, I guess, and ask that question about what does a trauma informed city look like? And I kind of need to reference Scotland as an example, and their ambition to be an ACE aware nation. When I say ACE, I'm referring to adverse childhood experiences. So they have a countrywide ambition to have all of their workforce, from the taxi drivers and the bus drivers to the shopkeepers, right across all of the services, for the entire population to have an awareness of the impact of childhood trauma and adversity. So that's really ambitious, isn't it? And yet we're even more ambitious here in Plymouth, because we also want to think about experiences that people might have as adults. So not just thinking about adversity in childhood, and also to think about our communities and our cultures, and that ACE, adverse childhood experiences, can also apply to adverse community environments and the difficulties that communities, we experience a huge amount of poverty and discrimination down here in Plymouth. So thinking about the communities in which we all exist, and that's really to bring it right into the local context. That's really where the trauma informed Plymouth network, that's how it's kind of been born out in its inception. During 2018 a document was written which I can share very happily if people were interested to see it, and it's called Envisaging Plymouth as a Trauma Informed City, and this has citywide endorsement with the council, with the police, with the Health and Wellbeing Board, around us all having this aspiration to be a trauma informed city. So that's why we've been delivering this training right the way through the pandemic. We've reached well over, I've lost count now, but well over 1,000 members of the workforce, particularly around children's safeguarding, but also broader than that. So working with domestic abuse services, domestic abuse specialist police officers. There's quite a few members of staff here from Live Well, inevitably, and we are rolling out training. We've done quite a few sessions specifically for Live Well, and we're going to be doing that every other month from September. We'll be delivering sessions across Live Well. But yes, now we would love to be able to offer this kind of more condensed version to businesses and the private sector, because we're kind of aware that, you know, in a lot of the sort of the statutory services that I'm more familiar with, there are wellbeing teams. There's a real emphasis on staff wellbeing, whereas perhaps in the private sector, sort of difficulties that people might experience, behavioural difficulties, are seen more in the context of either a health and safety perspective, keeping everybody safe, or the potential for it to become a disciplinary issue. And what we're kind of encouraging is the third point there is about really understanding why someone might behave in the way that they do. A massive message around trauma-informed approaches is about seeing behaviour as communication, that all behaviour, however problematic and difficult it might be to be on the receiving end of it, is communicating something, is communicating most often some kind of unmet need or something that is being unsaid. So, and trauma is common. We will look at some statistics in a minute, but this is about all of us. So an approach that can help us to understand behaviour that might otherwise be seen as confusing or self-defeating, or as I say, might lead to disciplinaries. If we can see behaviour as communicating something in the context of potentially trauma and adversity, rather than trying to fix it. There's a great quote that we often talk about. Dr. Karen Traisman is a real expert in this field, and she talks about being curious, not furious. So rather than reacting to somebody's behaviour, or rather than having to go into disciplinary procedures, for example, we're curious about what that behaviour might be communicating, what might be going on for that individual that might be leading them to behave in a certain way. And as Greg touched on, you know, what's the impact of not approaching things in a trauma-informed way? I mean, I guess that's where we're coming from. It's kind of, for us, it feels this is essential. This is absolutely essential if we want to be a trauma-informed city. So it's what's the impact of not doing this? And as Greg was touching on, this is about staff welfare, staff well-being, about sickness rates, about retention rates, about job satisfaction. So that's really thinking about it. About reducing the need for disciplinaries, about looking at things in a different way and helping employees to be, you know, the best versions they can, because happy employees make productive employees. So it's about this kind of corporate social responsibility, if you like. It's about the staff experience, about making the workplace a better and safer place to be for everybody. If we think about the amount of time we spend at work, if we can make that a happier and safer place to be for all people. And I think it's kindness. A trauma-informed approach is very much a values-based approach, and kindness is at the heart of that. And that might sound quite fluffy, but actually that need for kindness in the context of what we've all gone through over the last over 2 years of the pandemic, there's an awful lot to be said for approaching things in more kind and compassionate ways. And I know that is a commitment of Live Well, for example. So hopefully that provides a bit of kind of context about, you know, why we feel this is really, really important. So got to be aware of time, haven't I? I'm used to doing this in a whole day, or sometimes online in 3 hours. And oh my goodness, okay, we're going to rattle through. So these are the things that we're hoping to sort of cover in this session. These are our learning outcomes, if you like. So we'll talk a little bit about realizing what trauma is, and that trauma can impact on the experiences of individuals who are in our workforce, to recognise that trauma is common and understand trauma reactions. We'll look a little bit at that, to think about how we can respond to people who may be affected by trauma in a trauma sensitive and trauma informed way, and to highlight the importance of support and good self-care. So, what is trauma? So we go into this in so much more detail in our longer sessions, but as a kind of summary, we talk about adversity in childhood. There was a really seminal, groundbreaking study in the late 1990s around adverse childhood experiences, and that study focused on physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, on physical and emotional neglect, on a parent or a relative being in prison, on drug and alcohol use or mental health difficulties within the parental household, parents separating and divorce, and exposure to domestic abuse and violence. That's what that original big study kind of focused on. And I will come back to that when I'm talking about prevalence. So I think, you know, that was what this big study focused on, but I think we would all recognise that things like bullying, being exposed to discrimination and hate crime, and growing up in poverty, and to be fair to the original researchers, they looked at, originally they had like 100 different examples of adversities in childhood, but that would have been far too unwieldy a thing to study. So they sort of fine-tuned it down to those 10 that I've listed. So yeah, there's some examples of adversity that people can experience in childhood. We think about single incident traumas as well. So an acute health crisis, for example, a bereavement. This is why trauma is so common, because it will affect all of us at some point in our life. We will all lose somebody that we love. We might be involved in a road traffic accident, or someone might experience a rape or an assault. So these are like one-off incidents that are time limited and may or may not happen between people. And that's a bit of a distinction there with the more complex trauma. So complex trauma is defined as the sort of repeated, ongoing, pervasive kind of experiences of adversity and trauma. It almost always is interpersonal. It happens between people, so it leads to a breach of trust, so it impacts on relationships. It leads to a sense of a lack of control and feelings of powerlessness. So things like, you know, ongoing, pervasive, repeated childhood abuse and neglect, repeatedly witnessing or experiencing violence or abuse. And trauma is defined as being complex when the trauma was experienced at an early age, when the trauma lasted for a long time, where escape or rescue was unlikely or impossible, when it's experienced again and again and again, and quite key is that most often it's happening by someone who is close, who should be in a sort of trusted position. So that's sort of how we might define more complex traumas. And yes, I've touched on as well, adverse community environments, so living in poverty, social deprivation, pollution, natural disasters, for example, experiences of war, if we think about what's happening globally at the moment. So broadening it out from just being about the individual to thinking about the individual in the context of their community. So I've touched on this kind of repeatedly. I've heard myself say it, you know, a number of times, that, you know, this is about all of us, and it is pervasive. At some point in our lives, we will all experience something that might be described as traumatic. But yeah, in terms of a few statistics, people probably have come across the statistics around domestic abuse. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will experience domestic abuse at some point in their lifetime. 1 in 6 children have experienced some form of neglect or abuse. And that adverse childhood experiences study that I was referencing concluded that 67% of the population, so over 2/3 of the population, have at least of one of those adversities in childhood that I was listing. And 1 in 8 have 4 or more of them. And that's really significant because the study showed that if somebody experiences 4 or more of those adversities in childhood, they're significantly more likely to develop a range of health difficulties later on in life, and in terms of physical health and emotional health. And I'd love to do the statistics for each of your organisations, but obviously can't do that off the cuff. But we did do, and we were doing some work with Babcock. Scott Young is often on these calls, and he was describing Babcock having, I think, over 7,500 employees. So we worked out the stats, and it's sort of like, so 12.5% of the workforce at Babcock have 4 or more adversities. So have experienced 4 or more of those adversities. So this is huge. This is very much about all of us. It's very much about our workforce. And yeah, the more adversity in childhood that someone has experienced, the more likely they are to develop health and social difficulties, including a 20-year difference in life expectancy. So, but yeah, could go into lots of detail about that, but we'll keep moving forward. I guess this touches on it a little bit in terms of those kind of impacts on physical health. So we'll go back to that in terms of 3 times more likely to develop lung disease, twice as likely to develop liver disease, 4.5 more times likely to develop depression, 14 times more likely to be suicidal, and triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer. So that's touching on some of the physical health outcomes and the mental health outcomes there. Which is profound, isn't it? That's really, if we think about the people that we're coming into contact with, the prevalence of people that have experienced those adversities in childhood and the likely outcomes. We don't want to be deficit focused in the network. We're really, really always very mindful of this, because we don't want people on this very call kind of going, gosh, that list that Vicky just gave me, you know, I experienced some of them, or I know people that I care for and love who have experienced those things. We don't want to be deterministic. These are population studies that these statistics come from. It's not individual necessarily. And what we will talk about is the protective factors, the resilience factors that enable people to not just survive, but thrive as a result of adversities and trauma. And most often there's people in the workforce who have gravitated towards their roles because of adversity and trauma that they might have experienced, and that desire to want to make it different for other people. So absolutely, people who've experienced adversity and trauma represent, you know, the insight and strength and creativity that can often grow as well. So I don't want to be solely deficit focused, but it is also about highlighting that this is truly impactful. I don't know how well you can see that particular slide, but yeah, we talk about higher rates of people relying on drugs, on alcohol, misusing prescription drugs, for example, to manage their emotional distress. I'd very much like to think of mental health in the context of emotional distress. People are distressed about something. It's about better understanding that rather than pathologizing people as having something wrong with them. It's about understanding their difficulties in the context of their experiences. Higher rates of preventable disease, which accounts for that 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yeah, capacity for learning and life chances. If somebody's experiencing adversity in childhood and is struggling to concentrate in school because they're worried about what's going on at home, for example, less likely to be able to focus and attend to their work and retain information, which is going to have that then knock-on effect later on in life in terms of employment options, income potential, and then knock-on effect on housing and all the rest of it. So you can see how this can have this huge kind of knock-on effect. Whilst remembering that note of optimism, really want to focus on that as well. And the question is why? Because what was groundbreaking about this study was that it highlighted that it wasn't just, people might think, well, yes, if you're growing up in an area of poverty and your mum and dad smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol problematically or use drugs, then somebody's going to grow up and do the same things. And of course, they're going to have these health problems. But actually, that was what was so groundbreaking about the study, was that it highlighted that even if somebody wasn't smoking, for example, they were still 4 times more likely to develop lung cancer or lung disease. It wasn't about the smoking, it was about the adversity that they'd experienced in childhood. And this really, really challenged people. And in order to understand that, we need to look a little bit at what we mean by toxic stress in particular. So there's 3 different kinds of stress. I've done wellbeing sessions before and had a really interesting conversation about whether or not there is such a thing as positive stress. Whilst we're delivering this, we talk about the body's normal and healthy stress response. When we're anxious about something, when something's important to us, when we want to perform well, we have a physiological response in our body, and actually that helps us to perform well, to get through. When we get through the other side of it, we have a sense of achievement, and it actually builds those kinds of experiences, help build our resilience and help build our skills for other situations. There is such a thing as positive stress. Tolerable stress is about the tough stuff of life that we will all go through. But the key here, the difference between tolerable and toxic stress, is with tolerable stress, there is the presence of supportive and buffering relationships. So this might be something that is really profound, like the loss of a significant family member, significant bereavement, absolutely has a profound impact on the body and the stress system. So, we might lose our appetite, we might struggle to sleep or have nightmares, for example. But because there's a sense of shared experience and the supportive and buffering relationships in place, over time, that stress response does soothe, it does ease. So we describe this as tolerable stress. The difference is when those supportive and buffering relationships aren't there, and that's what turns into toxic stress. When people are in situations where their stress response is activated, they feel threatened by things that are happening to them, and there is no buffer. So the stress system of the body is permanently switched on. And this is what the research has shown has this impact on all the systems of the body, on our immune function. So we think about sickness and wellness, on our nervous system, our neurological system, even our genetics, and how it's passed on through generations. So toxic stress is what causes these physiological health difficulties for people. And when that toxic stress is happening, when somebody is in a stress response, when that stress system of the body is activated, that's when we have these stress responses. So we'll rattle through these a little bit. I realised I have updated this slide and I haven't done on here because there's also flop as a response as well. But we most often hear about fight and flight. They're the ones that we hear about and hear spoken of all the time. But there's actually flight, fight, freeze, fawn, and flop. And what's really important, so flight is obviously wanting to just get away from a situation. Fight is clearly, they're activating. Both of these are activating responses. We want to run and get away, or we want to fight back. Freeze is actually the most common. It happens the first. It's a very immediate response where we freeze. It's not a switching off, it's a hypervigilant, it's like tuning into all the senses, it's taking in lots and lots of information, and that almost happens before our old survival bit of the brain, because this is an unconscious response. We're not in control of which response we have, but whether we fight or whether we run away. And fawn is called like befriend, Stockholm syndrome, that kind of stuff people might have heard of, when the survival bit of the brain sort of says that actually to come alongside someone, to keep someone sweet, to appease somebody, to keep someone happy is actually the way to get through a situation. Because if we think about children, if we think about people who are perhaps not as big or strong enough, or don't have the option to flight, to run away. A child can't run away, they're more likely to hide, but might be in an abusive relationship where it's not an option to get away, and we might not have the mobility issue, capacity or the ability to fight back. We might not be big or strong enough, or we might have mobility issues. So actually flight and fight might not be options for a lot of people. So to freeze, to stay really, really still and just to try and take in all the information, or to try and come alongside and keep someone happy, might be the only options available to somebody. So they're actually much more common, and they're much less well understood, and often lead to the sort of self-blame of, like, when something happens, oh, why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I argue back? Why didn't I get away out of the situation? Or victim blaming. Why didn't she? Why doesn't she leave him? Why doesn't she leave that? Why did she not walk away? Why did she not? So self-blame and victim blaming often comes about as a result of this kind of a less well understood stress responses. But all of these stress responses happen and are controlled by the oldest bit of the brain, the survival bit of the brain that takes over. It's autonomic, it's reflexive. We're not in control of it. And underneath all of these responses is actually fear. which is kind of hard to remember when somebody's coming at you with a fight response and, you know, really heightened expressed emotion that might be being directed at you, but actually somebody has been threatened by something internally or in their environment. Something's been activated and their survival brain has said, it's worked for me before. If I come out all, you know, prepared for a fight, then actually people back off and leave me alone, and then I can feel safe again. So if something's worked for someone before, they're more likely to use that response again. And again, if we think about as a child, we're more likely to freeze or do the fawn response because that's all that's available to us, because we can't run away and we can't fight back. Actually, it shows that's why it's a more common response in adulthood as well. Because if a strategy has worked for people in the past, then they're more likely to use it again. So yeah, if we had more time, I'd love to hear. I'm hoping you're kind of thinking about, you know, do you see some of these responses in the people that you support and work with, and your colleagues in the workplace, in your businesses, and really thinking about what might, being curious again, back to that, curious, not furious, thinking about behavior as communicating. So if you have got somebody that is in fight mode, if you have got someone who's avoiding those meetings, if you have got somebody that says, yes, 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 I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, and then doesn't do it, perhaps it's one of these stress responses that's been activated because they're feeling threatened. And it's our sensory system that activates the stress response. So often people themselves don't really even know what's activated it, and we won't certainly know. Somebody might suddenly go into one of these and it's because it's been activated by a smell or by the sight of something or by hearing something. It's activated the stress system. So we need to be kind of curious about what might be going on for someone. How are we doing for time? I'm not sure. I can't remember how many slides. I think I'm only halfway through my slides. Here we go. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. We do go into a bit of the sort of hierarchy of brain development and stuff on our longer training, but it's just, I kind of like these triangles as a kind of, you know, instead of all the complicated brain science, neuroscience stuff, I like thinking of our brains as triangles. And actually, you know, if somebody's had the benefit of growing up in an environment where they feel safe and secure, their survival bit of their brain, the stress responses, only come online when there's a genuine threat in their environment. So it kind of like gives all that space. I'm looking at the upside down triangle that says typical development. It gives kind of all that space in the brain to learn about all the different emotions, to learn how to regulate and manage our emotional responses, to build those supportive and buffering relationships that we've just been talking about are so important for making stress not toxic but tolerable. And all that brain space for the cognition, for the higher brain processes, for all of that stuff about how do we communicate what's going on for us, how do we learn from our experiences, how do we plan for the future, and how do we you know, organize our time, all of that stuff that gets us through our day-to-day lives. But if somebody's in survival mode because of their earlier experiences or because of their current experiences, because they're feeling threatened by stuff that's going on in their lives, their survival brain is kind of activated and switched on all the time, that dominates. So you can see with the developmental trauma triangle, there's just less space. That trauma has happened in the context of relationships, so it damages the formation of those trusted and healthy relationships that we need to be buffers, and there's just less space. So when we're asking people to do stuff and it's just not following through, it might be that they are in survival mode and actually they haven't got the same access to those higher brain processes that help us learn from the past and plan for the future. Bit of a crash course there. And this is a bit of a different way of thinking about trauma. I've got to credit someone called Gabor Mate, who's just an exceptional speaker. He's an addiction specialist, actually, but with a real profound learning and message around trauma. And it's just kind of a different way of us thinking about trauma, because the argument here is trauma is not actually the event or the incident. It's not the thing that happens. It's about what happens inside of you in response to what happens. It's kind of getting our heads around that. So it's not the event itself, it's what happens inside of us in response to what happens to us. So we are all different. We're all a product of all the experiences that shape us, you know, right from in the womb, our early childhood experiences, what kind of childhood and current life we have, what support mechanisms are in place, all of these different variables. If we were all in a room together and there was an explosion outside of the building, we would all respond in slightly different ways depending on all of the different variables that make us us. We can't kind of be separated out from our experiences. So this does help. Thinking about it in that way helps us to understand why, you know, something might happen and people have very different responses. And you think, well, how come that person is struggling so much when that person's fine and yet they've experienced the same thing? Even children growing up in the same household, you know, one can do fine whilst another one can really struggle. And it's kind of like, you know, thinking about our individual response to a situation. And so a trauma-informed approach changes this question. I'm hoping some of you we're hearing this more and more. This is definitely becoming more widely used to change the question from what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Why are you behaving like that? Why are you in trouble again? Why are you back in my office? You know, there's another disciplinary. You know, what's wrong with you? Do you need to see a medic? Do you need to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist? You know, do you need medication? What's wrong with you? It changes that question to what's happened. Again, that being curious about what might have happened to someone. They're a product of their experiences, rather than making the problem theirs as an individual, rather than kind of pathologizing the individual that there's something wrong with them. It's being curious about what's happened to them and saying that actually, we've just talked about those stress responses. How people respond to trauma is actually a really normal response. It's our survival bit of the brain saying, this is what's going to keep you safe. This is what's going to help you survive and get through this moment. It's a really normal response to something that's out of the ordinary. So why is understanding trauma important for the work we do? I guess this is a little bit of a sort of summary. Sort of said, certainly the more complex traumas often happen in the context of relationships. So that can make it difficult for people who've experienced trauma to relate to other people. So there might be people in your organisation, in your business that, you know, are struggling to connect with others and relate to others, maybe more cautious, or maybe their behaviour may be alienating them or making causing difficulties. But trauma can leave people feeling like they struggle to connect with others and don't have any power. So it's kind of, again, being curious and compassionate about what might be going on. And again, it's about sort of thinking about that in the context of your places of work. Are there policies, are there procedures, are there parts of the service that you work in which might cause difficulties for someone who's experienced trauma, when we hold in mind just how prevalent trauma is? Might it be that some of the difficulties that certain members of staff might be experiencing actually have their roots in their experiences of trauma? Being curious about that. And might that mean that we need to approach things in different ways? So how we can respond in a trauma-informed way, how we can be trauma-informed people. As I said at the beginning, this is very much a values-based approach. And these are the values that underpin our Plymouth approach. So there's various sort of trauma-informed models across the country, but these were the values that were settled on in our approach to our envisaging Plymouth as a trauma-informed city. We could spend quite a long time on this, and I'd love to, but sort of, you know, thinking about not just physical safety. Obviously, we have a responsibility within our businesses and organisations to think about people's physical safety, but it's broader than that. It's thinking about how to enable people to feel emotionally safe, psychologically safe. Who can they feel that sense of safety with? Google, which if we think about it, whatever we think of Google, it's an enormous organisation, and they did a 5-year study. This was huge. Can't remember the year that they did it, but it's called Project Aristotle. You can look it up. They did this huge study about the workforce and about team functioning. And what it highlighted over 5 years, this massive study, was the most important feature of team functioning was emotional safety, psychological safety, that capacity to make mistakes and be allowed to learn from them, to be able to come together and reflect on when things aren't going quite so well, and to be able to move through that, to be a bit vulnerable with our colleagues, to be real. So that's, you know, this isn't just about the individual's experience. This is about team functioning. This is about having an organisation that has wellbeing at its heart, means that not only, again, like I said at the beginning, not only happier employees, but actually higher functioning employees, which is better for business. Being person-centered, which is around really building on people's strengths rather than focusing on the difficulties and the problems, enabling people to have a voice in what's happening and building upon their strengths, seeing the uniqueness in the individual and keeping that individual at the heart of any kind of interaction. Kindness, that sounds so fluffy, but it's so much bigger than that. It's about trying to avoid judgment, thinking about the language that we use so that we're not blaming and not shaming people for their difficulties. Shame, we need to be both trauma informed and shame sensitive. The two are go so hand in hand. When people have experienced trauma, there's often that real correlation with strong feelings of shame, and when we feel ashamed, we want to avoid those feelings, so it can lead us to push people away, to react to stuff, or to avoid things because we don't want our shame to be seen. So really, kindness is about really being mindful of that. Collaborative, empowering, this is about working alongside. It links with the person-centered. If there are difficulties, it's about working together for the best possible outcome and the best possible approach. It links with that Project Aristotle as well, about being open when things haven't worked, being reflective about how to be better, giving people autonomy and choice wherever possible. It's kind of like, right, we're in this situation, what are we going to do about it? We could do this. We could just giving people a sense of choice and power, because when people have had power and control taken away from them, often in the most profound of ways, in the context of trauma and neglect and abuse, it's really, really important to give people a sense of ownership, of control, of autonomy over what is happening. Okay, yeah, just a little bit of a summary slide, really, the values there along the top. So holding in mind that a person's behaviour or reactions might be trauma related. Responding by asking the person what they need, sort of not assuming that just because somebody, it's about creating that emotionally safe space for somebody to be able to talk about their difficulties, but not assuming that that's going to create more work for you, for example, and that you're going to have to refer on to specialist services. Often what comes out of the research is people just want to be heard, and they want their difficulties just to be acknowledged and validated. That's that showing empathy at the bottom. I think we need to change that. It's about validating, because it's about it's not about not holding people to account. We have to, think about the safety of the workforce. We can't, condone emotional, verbal abuse, for example, or whatever. It's not about sort of always not holding people to account, but it is going, I can see this is tough. I can see that something's going on. I can see that you're having a hard time at the moment. And that enables that building of trust and helping to build those trusted and supportive relationships, which are the difference between tolerable and toxic stress. Because this is Dr. Karen Treisman again, every single interaction that we have with anybody as we go about our business can be a meaningful intervention in itself. We on the longer training, we show a clip of Ian Wright, the footballer. You can see it on the BBC iPlayer Home Truths documentary. I don't know if people have seen that. He talks about his childhood and his difficulties, but he talks about meeting with his childhood. We show this clip where he meets his childhood teacher, and he just breaks down in tears. This man had made such a difference in his life. It's a really profound and beautiful clip, but we always show it because the teacher in the clip was really anxious about meeting Ian Wright, because he didn't think Ian Wright would remember him. And we just see this beautiful kind of thing being acted out, but whilst knowing that the teacher was anxious that he didn't realize the impact that he'd had on Ian's Wright's life. And I think we have to kind of remember this. We want to go about our jobs and do a good job, and we want to have purpose and meaning in our lives and all the rest of it. We don't necessarily know the impact that we're having, and this is kind of highlights that. There's a lovely Maya Angelou quote as well that says, like, people will forget what we say and forget what we do, but they'll never forget how we make them feel. And it's about, really holding on to the fact that if we can hold on to these trauma-informed values, and if we can work in trauma-informed ways, we can be that person, that buffering, supportive relationship, that trusted adult in somebody's life that can really make the difference. And it can be just as simple as an interaction. We absolutely think, right from the start, I hope the messages come across that this is about all of us. you know, for some people listening to this today, this may have been activating. It's really important that we give ourselves permission in our busy lives and busy worlds to be looking after ourselves and each other, because there is such a thing as vicarious and secondary trauma. You know, when we are exposed to other people's difficulties, that has a knock-on effect on us. When we're greeted with the pressures and strains of the way in which we work in our culture, this is impactful, and it can lead to burnout, and it can lead to compassion fatigue, and it can be impactful. So it's just kind of remembering that. And normally, Greg, now I do have a sort of an ABC exercise, but I don't think I'm going to do that. But what we would normally do is a sort of an exercise when we think about, how do we look after ourselves and each other? And often we have a bit of a conversation, but because we've just done this as a sort of verbatim sort of presentation, I'm not going to do that as an exercise. But the emphasis across all of the research into, you know, how do we help people and support people when they've experienced trauma and adversity, is about that self-care, that collective care, that looking after ourselves, looking after each other, knowing what works for us, getting some balance in our lives, connecting with activities, hobbies, interests, sports, community connection, cultural faith, you know, connecting with something that helps us to have a sense of ourselves, a sense of our own identity that's kind of irrespective of what might have gone on. That's the stuff that helps people to heal, and to recover and to thrive and to do well and to function well in work. So that presence of trusted and supportive relationships and that sense of a self that's connected with other things than difficulty is really what helps people to survive and thrive. And that's just a little bit of information. My email's on the screen if you're interested in learning more about the Plymouth approach to being a trauma-informed city, if you're interested in the longer training sessions, if you're interested in joining the network indeed, because WIT is just an open network of people who are interested in trauma, in working in trauma-informed ways. So if you'd be interested in getting involved, I'd love to hear from you. I'll put my email address, I'll stop this sharing now and put my email address in the chat, and hope that's been okay, Greg, and would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Vicky. I suppose it's out to everyone in the room. Has anyone got any questions, either they want to pop in the chat bar or whether you just want to kind of come off mute and ask a question or share a kind of thought? I've certainly taken a fair few notes down there.
I love Louise's comment in the chat about that question change. Louise, I think you're referring to that, you know, changing from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. It's quite a profound way of thinking about things differently, isn't it? And it comes, that first way is very judgmental, it's very critical, and we certainly see it in the medical world as well. But yeah, being more curious. So thank you for writing that in the chat, Louise.
Anyone got any questions or thoughts?
I'd love to hear what people feel about the relevance of this for their businesses and organisations, whether this is something that we should and could be rolling out more widely. Does this feel relevant? Does this feel pitched right? You know, because this is a pilot at this stage, we'd really welcome people's feedback on that as well.
I think we've got a few hands up. Carolyn?
Yay.
Hi, Greg and Vicky. Obviously, we've all been party to a conversation around this. I guess for other people in the room, I know the conversation we've had is about maybe doing some train the trainer work so that we can deliver it within our organisations. And because I've worked with you, I'm feeling relatively confident that I'd be able to do that. But I suspect for other people in the room, they may not feel the same. So how easy is it for them to have someone support them and deliver, you know, this session, the brief session, or the 3-hour session for their organisations? Because I don't know how many people who are trained to deliver it have got the time at the moment, because I know you've been pretty overwhelmed.
I I think that could be it's a great question, Carolyn, and it would need to be part of a bigger conversation, wouldn't it? But something that the Trauma Informed Plymouth Network would utterly be, keen to support in any way that it needs to be. Train the trainer and getting this out as widely as possible and supporting the workforce in delivering this, that would absolutely be our ambition, whilst obviously being really sensitive to making sure that the support networks around that are in place. So that would probably be very much on an organisation by organisation basis, but we'd welcome discussion and conversation about it, see what interest there is, and take it further with you, Carolyn, with Greg, with Scott, who, yes, I haven't credited, and I'm so sorry for not doing that, because you've been very instrumental and just fundamental and integral to developing this and kind of starting this conversation about rolling this out.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks, Vicky. Yeah, I think it's just a work in progress, isn't it, really? And having that capacity, if, all of a sudden there are a number of organisations that were really keen to sort of incorporate this within their, staff training, or they just wanted their certain group of managers, we need to make sure we've got that capacity to be able to sort of fill that demand. Louise, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Vicky's question about how useful we think it's going to be. I mean, I think this kind of training in our organisation would be really useful. We got a lot of younger people working for us, as well as a lot of older people within higher level posts. And sometimes I think there is a tendency to misalign each other, if you see what I mean. The people with experience of all this life behind them cannot always relate to people with little experience, and I think some of this training would help them to be able to relate to each other better at times and stop taking a automatic judgmental response and have a more curious response. And I love that. That is one thing I really do love. I'm always trying to tell my colleagues at work, when I'm being a wellbeing champion, everything else, and to be more curious about why somebody reacted the way they did, rather than just going, oh well, they did it because of this. And I'm like, well, how can you know that they did it because of that? Could they? And I'm always encouraging people to try and think of how many ways can you think that person might have responded like that, just to open their eyes to actually the enormity of reasons why somebody might respond in the way that they did. And so I absolutely love that. So that's all I was going to say.
Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. And so there's so much in there that was lovely. I'm interested to know people's thoughts on, is the content pitched right? Do you need more time, for example? But again, that might be on an organisation by organisation kind of basis, and to think about the content and how it lands with people, and having those opportunities, I think, to have those kind of, like Louise was describing, being able to go, okay, let's think about that for a little bit longer. What does being curious, not furious mean? How can we think about different people's behaviour in so many ways? But hopefully this kind of opens up that way of thinking for people.
It feels to me that it probably needs a minimum of an hour and a half to 2 hours, so that you can actually get those conversations incorporated within it at each point. Because I think even right at the beginning about what is trauma, even just opening up that question to the group, to a small group, what does the word trauma mean to you? It's going to be so many different things before you even get into the depths of the behaviours that come from that. So I think for me, thinking about how I would like it delivered here to our groups of managers, and I'd welcome, I've got 3 of them on the call, I'd welcome their views, but I think we probably need at least 2 hours to deliver even the set of slides that you've got there, if we're going to think about train the trainer type work.
I'd agree, but I think that'd be better suited in in-person deliverance rather than across teams.
This is the challenge, Thomas, that we were initially like really, really clear that it had to be in person, and we had to have a whole day because just of the nature of you know, different people's responses and what it might activate in people, and different people's, you know, just responses to it. But then, of course, the pandemic put paid to that, and we had to condense it. So we were thinking about, you know, the virtual world, and then this is trying to be respectful and aware of the challenges for different businesses and organisations that haven't necessarily got the time, you know, to release staff for longer sessions. But utterly agree that just an hour of going, oh, lots of information is there'd have to be at least the sort of opportunity for reflection and debriefing and stuff afterwards, an absolute minimum as well, because it may well bring things up for people.
Thanks, Vicky, and yeah, thanks for input, Carolyn and Thomas. Anyone else got any questions, or is there anything come through on the chat bar, Jenny?
We've got some comments. We've got, let's see now. We have Nita, who has said that her daughter's home from university. Nita would like to get more involved in the training in some way if she could. And Nita's daughter is home from uni and wondered whether there are any thoughts to offer this to universities.
Yeah, Nita, it's lovely to have you on the call. So I know we've emailed lots of times back and forth. So yeah, it's great to see you. And yeah, we're making inroads and aware that that we could be doing more. So we've been invited in to speak to students on their social care training.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it needs to go everywhere, doesn't it? At the end of the day, yeah. If I got my daughter here, she's actually. Well, I said to her, "Watch this one with me. It's going to be really fascinating." And yeah, so that's kind of what, just to clear that one up. But yeah, yeah, I've been trying to get on the full course for a while, as you know, and I think it's always Mondays and Tuesdays, which is my day off, and I've been trying to. So whether it's I'll get there. I will get there at the end.
You'll be finally, Nita, you'll be hopefully pleased to hear we've got Friday sessions booked in from September.
Wonderful. Count me in.
Yay.
Thank you.
But yes, you're absolutely right. And to your daughter, we need to make more inroads into the new. It's not for lack of receptiveness. It's just how vast this world of working in trauma-informed ways is. But we've got a great connection in the university. Well, a number of them. So yeah, brilliant. Yeah. And Larissa's comment as well about improving lives. Lovely to see you as well, Larissa. And absolutely, we're going to be getting all of the staff improving lives involved in the training as well. So, I just want to read Lee and Louise's comments. Oh, great question, Lee. I love that. So yes, compassion is one of the values that you've picked, and that it's all fine if the values have slightly different names, because we're all saying the same thing, aren't we? And I know that when the values for the trauma network were settled upon, it was kindness that had the longest and biggest conversation, because it was, should it be compassion, should it be kindness, should it be empathy, you know, what should it be? And in the end we just decided to go with the sort of the most simple language, really, was why we settled on kindness. But it's all saying the same thing, isn't it? I love that there's that priority you've said about understanding what's driving someone's behavior. So absolutely, we're saying the same thing. Be interesting to explore even further how this work might support and develop an organizational psychological safety. How do you know when it's improved? That is the $1 million question, isn't it? And I heard this great quote that I won't be able to repeat back right now, but that it's the stuff we measure is often the least meaningful. The most meaningful stuff is the hardest to measure. It was said better than that when I heard it. But it is, we come across this all the time, Lee, when we're talking about working in trauma-informed ways. This is about people's feeling, isn't it? It's about how you feel coming to work. It's how you feel in yourself. It's how safe you feel, how able you are to be vulnerable and make a mistake and not feel that your just head's going to roll. It's because it's sentient stuff, it's so much harder to measure. There aren't these nice quantifiable tick box outcomes, and I think we just have to lean into that when we're working around trauma-informed ways of working, and accept that there aren't these tidy measures. But yeah, if we can get to a point where you're talking to staff and they're saying that they feel differently in work, the culture of the organisation is shifting, then you know that you're winning. But absolutely focusing with those values around compassion, understanding what's driving people's behaviour, psychological safety, yeah, absolutely, that's what it's all about, and that's the focus. We are over the next year hoping to develop a sort of tool, for want of a better word. That's not the word that I want to settle on, but a sort of a package, if you like, for organizations to think about how can we work in more, how can we bring about trauma-informed cultures within our organizations. So there might be some stuff that's developing over the next few months.
And there's a comment from Louise just saying that it would be good to still offer online sessions as well, because there's a place for those. And so perhaps, a workplace offer just needs to be a mix of face-to-face and virtual. Certainly the training that we received at Live Well, which was virtual, was over a longer session and gave plenty of opportunity to speak. So maybe a mix of offers that could suit businesses might be a good idea.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the few good things that's come out of the pandemic has shown us that actually, yeah, we can work in this way, and that there's pros and cons to both. So yeah, in the network, we've absolutely kept hold of both of those offers. Louise, I couldn't agree more. It works better for people accessibility wise, doesn't it, for some people? Yeah.
I think businesses obviously they're working in different environments, aren't they, Vicky? And we've experienced that even in our kind of little working group, where obviously Scott from Babcock, he's delivered some face-to-face training based purely around the fact that the individuals that he wanted to reach are working in person. They don't have access to laptops. It's just not the way that they're working. But in other organizations, thinking about my own personal circumstances, yeah, we're always going to be, this is going to be the easiest way to access it virtually. So whatever we develop and whatever happens, I think, yeah, a bit of both is hopefully going to mean it's as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Yeah. Any other thoughts before I share some of mine? I know one of the things that we were talking about just then about how you measure the outcome and how you measure how people feel. I think, the first measure would actually be staff sharing how they're feeling and being asked how they're feeling. And I think not just thinking about our own organization, but when we're talking with lots of organizations we support, sometimes staff don't feel comfortable to share how they're feeling. So even if someone was at a point where they felt they could say, I'm not feeling very good, then that in itself is a start, because then you can start doing something about it. And I think when you came along to our team, Vicky, kind of last year or whenever it was, that was the sort of train of thought I was kind of getting towards around. This is crucial into creating those environments and those spaces where people feel as though, one, they can say something if they're not feeling great, but also the people they're talking to, and I've written down managers so many times, but the key role managers play in being able to respond to those things. And I think sometimes managers won't ask how are you feeling, because either one, they don't know how to deal with a challenge if that individual is struggling, or they're kind of like, I don't know, they don't feel they've got the time or the energy to do those things. And I think that although it's not the same with the training, this training is about understanding the content. I suppose an organization needs to think about how can we better support our managers to be able to do this well, to ask those questions well, to have that understanding. I mean, like I say, you only just touched on the science behind it today, and even then it can be quite heavy. But those pyramid things, just for me, kind of open my eyes with regards to, we all have that stress in our lives, whether it be deadlines at work or challenges with colleagues or whatever. But if we've had what you might describe as sort of like a normal upbringing, where only in very small circumstances do we get into that flight or flight sort of situation. Normally we can kind of step back and go, right, okay, this isn't great, I'm feeling stressed, but how can I cope with it? Other individuals that maybe haven't had that, they're straight away into that flight or fight. And again, if a manager sees that, and quite often within organizations you've got policies that kind of push people down this like route, and the only eventual outcome is sort of disciplinary or kind of like basically the individual being fired or stepping away from the organization. which is an ultimate fail because that's costing everyone time and money. So it's sort of how can we change that train of thought, support our managers, while also maybe making practical changes to policies and processes, changing the language we use. So there's so many things that can just have such a positive knock-on effect if we can get people thinking in that way and be, like you've said so many times, being curious, asking why, rather than just saying, what's kind of wrong with you. But yeah.
It's that stuff about, I really like that Greg, because it is about that confidence. How can we better support managers to feel confident to embrace this? And on the longer sort of training, we talk a lot about that fear of, oh gosh, if I ask the question, and I'm going to open a can of worms and I'm not going to know what to do with it. And actually that the kind of research doesn't bear it out, that there's a simplicity to a trauma-informed approach. It's about being willing to be curious, as we've said lots and lots of times, but willing to just kind of say, you seem to be struggling today, or you seem to be struggling at the moment, just opening up an opportunity to create a safe space to have a conversation, and not being fearful of, oh my goodness, then what am I going to have to do with this? And of course there's a role for specialist services, of course there is, and it is about managers being aware of being able to refer on, but a lot of the time it's not about that. Again, it's back to this sentient thing. It's about how people feel, and if people are provided just with a safe space where they feel that what's going on for them has been clocked, has been noticed, has been seen, just that recognition and that acknowledgement, and then that validation of, God, that seems tough. What do you want us to do about it together? It doesn't have to be now we've got to set a whole chain of events in action, and it's got to create lots more work. It's sometimes people are just like, I've just really valued that somebody has clocked that I'm struggling, and they've made a space to show interest, to see me. It's often as simple as that. So it's almost about, some of the work I think with managers is about reducing some of that fear. That I think as soon as we start talking about trauma, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to ever be skilled enough to deal with that. But it's just about creating safe spaces. If we get the emotional, psychological safety bit right, the rest follows. That's the most important kind of value, I think, of all of that.
Yep. I think we've had another comment in the chat bar.
Oh, yeah.
So Kay Jones, works in the fire service, and the term trauma is often associated with incidents only. My first challenge is to broaden this perspective, and I wouldn't want language to be a barrier. Is there anything we can do? Any hints or tips?
I'm really smiling because we came across this. We've just held a conference across the peninsula of working in trauma-informed ways, and we had our don't know if we've got time for me to tell you. Is it all right to just tell you this little?
You're good, Vicky. Yeah, we're okay for time.
Because we had some people like the tech people that came and recorded it for us. So they were saying, as the Peninsula Trauma Network got a logo, and they went about and did some Google research, and there's a Peninsula Trauma Network, but it's not the fire service, but it is emergency services. So their logo is like a helicopter, and it's all about, it's all about responding to trauma, as in very medical terms. And I'm sorry that I'm smiling, but it was just because it's not probably funny, but it is like that we see it. I forget that trauma in those emergency services terms is very different to the kind of how we're getting it across, and we had to kind of say, no, that's not our network. But Kay Jones, I don't know your first name, I'm sorry, but Karina, yeah. Karina, hi, that's nice. I guess it is going back to that Gabor Mate stuff, the dots on the screen. It's coming away from that. It isn't the incident, it isn't the event. So really coming away from, it isn't the incident, really trying to broaden that perspective of saying it's about how we respond to that, and that our response to it, everything I was sort of saying about that is shaped by just so many different variables. Because we all on this screen will have different stress responses. Some of us will go into fight mode, some of us will go into flight mode, some of us will drop to the floor. I didn't talk about flop actually. So it's and what will have shaped that will have been our experiences and everything that's gone before. So you're absolutely right to say the language can be a barrier, and language is just fundamental in a trauma-informed approach. We spend an awful lot of time thinking about language, so you're right to sort of zone in on that as a starting point. Is trying to nudge that and shift that perspective, isn't it? To think, yes, it's a traumatic incident, but it's actually what we want to think about is how people respond and react to that incident. That's the shift.
Absolutely. And I think when we were talking about how long these sessions might need, I think, for example, if I was looking at our line managers, they would need some time to unpick what trauma meant in those situations, but also in terms of supporting their teams, personal lives. And, so it's got so many different spheres, hasn't it, that it needs to be kind of explored. So, yeah, a couple of hours, I think I'd agree, would probably be needed.
This is such the challenge, isn't it, about like respecting people's time. How much time have people got to give up for training, have got available for it, whilst recognizing the vastness of this and what it brings up. So yeah, it's a really tricky balance to get. But we're hoping to do some work with the fire service, so I'm going to write down your name if that's all right, Karina, and potentially, would you be okay with me getting in touch? Because this
absolutely.
is
great.
Excellent. Brilliant.
Thanks both.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, and obviously, Vicky's contact details will be shared as long as you're happy with that, Vicky. After the session, I'll be sending out an email probably later this afternoon that will include both sets of presentations, all the links, contact details. So if people think of questions later today or later in the week, then you can get in contact with either Vicky or myself, and we can do our best to answer those and continue that conversation via email or whatever it might be. Any other kind of thoughts or questions? Vicky's popped her email address. Go on, Jenny.
There's another one in the chat, which is from Nita. Many managers on the front line are firefighting on a daily basis and struggling themselves. So the change culture needs to come from the top to provide them with the support as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Nita, couldn't agree more. And that's absolutely what we're aspiring to in terms of Plymouth being a trauma-informed city. The network itself has grown in a really ground up, grassroots kind of way, and what you're saying though, Nita, is absolutely true as well. We need then that sort of strategic top-down approach, and I'm confident that at the moment we are starting to meet in the middle. So but a lot of the time I think that's what Greg's suggesting as well. We need to maybe do these sessions with the managers first so that they're on board. Absolutely. And it's about that staff well-being. I say this again and again and again. I really think that so often it's not an add-on, but it's a part of, whereas actually it needs to be top and central. It needs to be for staff well-being, thinking about that, having that support from the top, and thinking about staff well-being before anything else, really, because this stuff is impactful, which is what you guys are all about. So it's great.
And we found ourselves saying that so many times, during the pandemic, kind of since it, and it was still relevant even before it, that if you can, I think you said it earlier, Vicky, if you can keep your workforce happy and healthy, they'll look after everything else, whether that be, attending fires, whether that be looking after patients, whether that be selling a product or marketing, whatever it might be. If you've got a happy and healthy workforce, generally that will look after that bread and butter of whatever your organization's doing. It does get challenging. We've all got operational pressures, as they like to get called, and that balance off between delivering those operational pressures while not putting too much pressure on a workforce, has been put under a lot of strain over the last few years. But I think it's also opened the eyes of a lot of organizations into thinking, what are we missing? Okay, we've got occupational health, we've got our, referrals to psychological therapy, but what can we do to keep people well in the first place, and to recognize those kind of little warning signs? And again, when you came to speak to us, last year, whenever it was, that's, when the bells started going off in my head about, this is exactly what we're looking for. Initially, people think, that's nothing to do with me, wanting to know about what happened to someone when they were younger. No, you don't need to go into detail about it. It's just having the ability and the confidence to ask, to be curious, and to say, how you're feeling, and is there anything I can do to help? what I'll put as well in the email this afternoon, if I can find it, is a link to that Ian Wright video that you were talking about, Vicky. So if people in their own time want to watch that, because I think, again, it's just a really good video to watch to show the impact that, whether it be us or a colleague, that if they communicate with someone in a certain way, the difference it can make to that person's life. So I'll try and find the link, and then I'll pop it in the email as well, so people can just watch that if they want to. So
it's either it's on BBC iPlayer, the Home Truths documentary, if people want to watch the whole documentary, or do you want the actual, just the short clip that we use in the
just the short clip if it's easy enough to find, Vicky, but probably on YouTube or something, won't it? I can.
It is now. I'm sending it to you now.
Oh, bless you.
There's various different versions, and we've
Thanks,
got one
Vicky.
that we like that's edited just right. So
fab.
Cool. All right.
Right. Has anyone got any final questions, or are there any other things in the chat bar, Jenny, or have we?
We have just got one more in the chat from Louise. This is asking about online grief training planned, number of staff going through the type of trauma at the moment, and are very interested in upskilling staff to deal with that. I know I think there is one just coming out shortly. And is there a plan to roll this out to schools? That's from Wendy. She works in a special school for young people with trauma, and we are well informed regarding a trauma-informed approach with looking after our young people, but we're not very good at looking out for each other. I'll let you come back on those two.
Yeah, so often. Go on, Vicky, you go first.
No, go for it, Greg. Sorry.
I was going to say, the point right at the end of Wendy's thing, so often the way, whether we see it in health and social care as well, really, really good. So much energy, money, capacity, time plowed into looking after patients, and in your case, looking after the kids, which is obviously really important. But equally as important to that is the individuals doing that work, providing that care, providing that education. So it's recognizing that, and then trying to kind of find a way of increasing the amount of capacity and resource and sometimes financial support that goes into that as well.
Can I just say that I'm not sure which school are you from, Wendy? Mount Tamar. I can fully recommend getting involved in the Wellbeing at Work awards. That really does give focus to an organisation to sort of implement wellbeing in the workplace, get senior management on board, have a wellbeing steering group, take part in the awards, so you can really embed wellbeing, and it's at the top of your agenda, and it really does give focus to an organisation. My email address is in the chat if you'd be interested in doing that, but that really does help to embed it within the organisation.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, can I come in to Wendy?
Of course you can, Vicky.
Just because, just more generally speaking, in terms of trauma-informed ways of working in schools, we've had Trauma-Informed Schools UK, which is a big national organisation, delivering lots of training in a lot of our schools across the city since sort of last September. No, gosh, I don't know, quite a long time, last 6 months, 8 months or so. And we are delivering some training in schools as well, because we can do the whole staff cohort, whereas they just do like a couple of members of staff per school. But I really, I'm interested in your point about not looking after each other very well. So that is why that's so instrumental. But there is a plan around Mount Tamar. We just delivered a full day's training for Seymour House, because they're hoping to be a trauma-informed setting. And I know Alan from Mount Tamar just wanted us to start with Seymour because it's a smaller setting, but there's a view to be supporting Mount Tamar in this journey as well. And your comment has made me, I will remember that we need to really make that focus on the stuff at the end that I got, that I was rushed around, which is about how do we actually look after each other as well, is really important. So Wendy, if you don't mind putting your surname in, then perhaps again, when things develop with Mount Tamar, it might be nice to sort of connect with you as well. If excellent. If that's okay, then that would be great to connect with you around that as well in time. But give Alan a nudge ask questions about when we can come and do some work with the school.
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks, Wendy, for the question. So yeah, we're approaching 11:30. I hope everyone's found today's session sort of interesting and sort of thought-provoking. Massive thanks to Vicky and coming along and sharing your kind of time and your expertise, Vicky, with everyone. I hope that, yeah, again, people, if they need more information, they obviously can get in contact with you and look to become more of an active part of this movement that's going on in Plymouth, this development of this network. It really is fab. So a big thanks to you.
No, as ever, Greg, it's thanks for you for making this, this space an option to get to connect with all these people is wonderful. And thanks to you and to Carolyn and to Scott for, being a part of making this all happen. So yeah, hopefully this is just the beginning. So
that's a pleasure. Yeah, a pleasure. And a big thanks to everyone for coming along today. And again, putting aside an hour and a half of your time to come along and be part of the session. As always, a big thanks to the Plymouth and Devon Chamber of Commerce, who host the sessions for us, and Olivia behind the scenes, making sure all the technology behaves itself and does as it should. I can see a couple of other comments in the chat bar. Absolutely, we'll make sure we get some more information across to you regarding the Wellbeing Champions. Sorry, Kay Jones, I've forgotten your first name again. I know Vicky was asking before, but yeah, I'll drop you an email and share some information, and we can talk about that. Thanks to Jenny as well for keeping an eye on the chat bar and sorting out those bits. Go and look after yourself, everyone. We're 11:30, so maybe time for a walk or an early lunch. Plenty of drink, stay hydrated, and yeah, we'll see you all again hopefully in 3 months' time for the menopause awareness training. Have a lovely summer, and yeah, all stay well.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.